When we come to places such as this, it's customary for us to ask permission, but it's also acknowledging the sacredness around us, sacredness above us in the sun, in the moon, in the stars, the sacredness of the earth we stand on. So from Wakea to Papahanamoku, it's acknowledging all that Keakua, the Creator, bestowed upon us.
If we allow them to bomb us, then you can feel helpless. Then it's not your fault. But it is our fault for lying down.
You can't do to the land or to the water or to the plants and animals without doing to ourselves.
You know, the EV and the INA can't speak for itself.
Target identified.
Creating a military toxic stew that we don't know the full implications of.
And there's many sites that have been lost because there were not laws and things to protect them. And now that there are laws, even those laws are not being followed.
One thing that has been confirmed is the use of depleted uranium weapons up there. The full extent we don't know.
If people can just remember that these things are still sacred, that Mauna Wakea is still sacred, Pohakuloa is still sacred, that if we all start to remember that, then there'll be a shift in consciousness of humanity. And these things won't be allowed to continue to occur.
Since the beginning, Hawaiians have existed as part of the living universe. For generations, families lived in harmony with nature. This harmony is being destroyed on what some would consider the most sacred place on the island. Pohakuloa lies in the center of Hawaii, embraced on one side by Mauna Loa, on the other by Mauna Kea.
This particular ahu sits as a marker on this pu'u, and we're in this pu'u called pu'u kole. We're right in the energetic piko, in the center of the island. There's an energetic lines around north, south, east, west, and it's encircled. And they used to walk these lines just to maintain the energy of these particular lines on the island.
But this living heart of Hawaii Island is under attack. In World War II, the Marines were the first to use Pohakuloa as a training area for live fire exercises until the mid-1950s when the Army took over. Pohakuloa is vast, 133,000 acres, most of which is ceded land. Hawaiian Kingdom government land and private crown lands of Queen Liliuokalani taken at the time of the overthrow. Presidents and Hawaii state governors handed these lands over to the Army for their training area. Additional large tracts of ceded land under the control of the State Department of Land and Natural Resources is leased to the Army at the cost of $1 for a 65-year period. Although the Army's lease for nearly 23,000 acres is set to expire in 2029, they are currently negotiating with the state to extend the lease to 2078.
The installation itself is run by the U.S. Army Garrison in Pohakuloa. It's really a minimal staff, but they cycle a lot of troops through there.
They've used all kinds of weapons up there. Even B-2 bombers from Guam fly here and bomb at Pohakuloa. It's every branch of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, that attack Pohakuloa.
Biannually, RIMPAC training exercises converge on Pohakuloa with 22 countries participating in active war games. At first glance, it seems an ideal location, uninhabited, with plenty of maneuvering space, and tucked away enough to be out of sight and out of mind. But not for everyone. People who have been there and families who have ancestral ties to Pohakuloa say it's not a barren place of lava rock and cinder cones.
Umi was one of my ancestors. Umi built heiau in the area of the mountain. He built Ahua Umi, and he built another heiau at Pu'uke'eke. There are other sites in the area that's really beautiful and things that and areas that should be preserved.
There are many tunnels throughout Pohakuloa, and there are many of our artifacts. It's our iwi.
And I was amazed at some of the trails and things was out there. There's like some gulches that go down, and they built stone bridges across the place.
This is really pre-contact type sites. In addition, there's also a number of sacred mountains surrounding Pohakuloa, as it occupies a large portion of the saddle region, and there's also smaller but significant pu'u in the area too.
There has never been a full archaeological survey of these sites, and that, they say, is unacceptable.
I've talked to cultural monitors that have driven through Pohakuloa and could see artifacts sticking out of the caves. That kind of desecration, is sacrilegious.
There's no way to place a price on cultural sites. It's a priceless resource that cannot ever be replaced.
Desecration of sacred sites is not the only problem. There is deep and growing concern about the possible health risks to the troops training at Pohakuloa and those who live in surrounding areas. The controversy involves a radioactive heavy metal called depleted uranium, or DU. DU is what's left over after uranium is used to make fuel for nuclear reactors and weapons. Today, it's used to make armor plating, missiles, bombs, landmines, bullets, and shells.
The military discovered that when you take these metal slugs, just straight depleted uranium, fire them at high speed, and they pierce, say, a tank, on impact they will explode at 3,000 degrees, and they themselves are very explosive. Now, when you do that, what happens to the uranium? Half of it settles back down on the ground, and half goes into the air. So all of a sudden you got this aerosolized uranium.
I live about 20 or so miles away from Pohakuloa. I can still feel the ground shake and hear the thunder of the artillery. So every time I hear that, I cringe, thinking of the depleted uranium dust coming up into the air and coming down into the people in Kona.
In and of itself, depleted stuff is not that dangerous, but alpha particles, emitters within your body, are the most deadly form of radiation of all. It is stopped by your skin, but in your body, it will mutate your DNA more so than any other kind of radiation. If it doesn't go into your gene and goes into the stomach or the brain, well, that's your problem. You might get cancer, you might get problems. But if it goes into your genes, you kind of bought the farm.
In 2007, after years of denying it, the Army admitted it had been using DU in some of the weapons deployed at Pohakuloa. And in fact, the DU was still present in the live firing ranges.
As far as the depleted uranium goes, it's been there from the 1960s. They're not really sure where it's located, how much is really there.
I suspect there's a lot of radiation up there, a lot more radiation than the Army wants to admit to.
The Army did its own studies, and in a 2008 report outlined in the U.S. Army website, came to the conclusion that, quote, there is no imminent or immediate threat to human health from the DU present on Hawaii's ranges.
A lot of the people, except the UK and the US, which have a conflict of interest here, consider depleted uranium weapon of mass destruction, unintended target, legacy for on and on.
The Army, for instance, has been somewhat reluctant to tell the truth. For many, many years, upon being asked, the story was there is no DU at Pohakuloa, as there is no DU at Schofield. Lo and behold, it's announced, yes, we have had DU, we have done these things, but it's minimal. And the DU we have is, quote, safe.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot of faith what's coming down. I mean, a common sense person would say, why we have the guy with a conflict of interest doing his own quality assurance?
We have the county council's resolution in 2008 saying that there should be an unbiased report, an unbiased study, an independent study relating to Pohakuloa and the depleted uranium, and nothing has been done about this study.
The most immediate fear is that with the continued shelling, the DU will burn or explode, sending aerosolized particles into the air. How does this affect the families living downwind of the range and even the troops training at Pohakuloa?
Yeah, there is a fear of getting contaminated from this stuff, but I cannot leave.
But a key point that the county council called for 4.5 years ago here on this island by a vote of 8-1 was stopping all live fire at Pohakuloa until there's a complete assessment of the uranium contamination and cleanup they called for.
For those who say this should not be our fight, there's a parallel battle that is still unsettling. Kaho'olawe. For years, it was known as the Target Isle, bombed and desecrated in the name of national defense. In the beginning, only a handful had the courage and the outrage to speak up in the face of overwhelming opposition, even from the Hawaiian community. Not our kuleana, many said. Don't interfere with the military's ability to do its job. Almost everyone thought it was an unwinnable fight.
But they stood up for what they knew in their hearts was right, was truthful. That these sacred places of our islands are being destroyed. And you cannot just sit around or just stay in silence. You have to speak up.
Kaho'olawe, we finally stopped the bombing on. But Pohakuloa, there are people living on this island, and they don't seem to have any regard at all for the health and safety of the people of this island.
Kaho'olawe was being bombed since World War II, and it took those people, was it 1977, I believe it was the first occupation. That's when it became front and center for discussion. The same with Pohakuloa. We've been trying all these other things, so I think maybe it has to come down to the nonviolent direct action.
The Navy would say in the press conference that Kaho'olawe is a strategic military bombing site, bombing practice area. Is significant to the national defense of the United States, and we need it. But as we've seen, they didn't really need it. Eventually, the island was returned.
But stopping the bombing was just the beginning. We are still trying to undo the devastation caused by years of abuse to the land. Even today, after the federal government has poured millions of dollars into efforts to clear the ordnance, only a tiny portion of the island is safe.
Once that bombing stopped in Kaho'olawe, Pohakuloa really is the central training area here. At 133,000 acres, Kaho'olawe was 28,000 acres. But this is nearly 5 times the size of Kaho'olawe.
It's up to us to ask the questions for all who live in Hawaii. What are we doing to our land, our air, and our groundwater? If no one answers, there could be consequences for generations to come. If we don't push for action, who is held accountable for the health of our families, our children, and for the troops who put themselves in harm's way? If we are silent, who speaks for our culture and the preservation of our beliefs? Remember the lessons of Kaho'olawe. If not for the voices of a brave few, where would we be today? The worst thing we can do is nothing. The biggest obstacles to an acceptable outcome are apathy and inaction.
You can say you don't know, but this is what they're supposed to do, make you know. And if you know, do you care now that you know? And if you don't care, how come? What happened to your cultural dignity? You're supposed to be mad.